first morning, we sat in a circle on stage while Shaw read the play to us. It was so inspiring. His delivery was clear and emphatic, and his exuberance in the lighter scenes wonderfully refreshing. I found it marvellous for understanding the music and phrasing of his superb dialogue. He spoke it all so beautifully, with that lovely voice of his, which has a reach of 4 or 5 octaves. He can make any sound he wants to. He ought to have been an actor, really.
Oh, you're quite wrong there, Sybil. His acting is too broad. I don't believe he could sustain a characterisation through a whole evening. But I think he's better than anyone at offering an actor a half-minute sketch of a character. And that first read-through helped us absorb the shape of the play and get an idea of the characters.
And then, without any discussion, he got us to our feet and plunged straight into blocking our moves and teaching us our positions, all of which he'd worked out beforehand. But he then gave us a stern warning.
I want you to perform the play exactly as I wrote it. I had terrible feuds with Mrs. Platt, Henry Irving and Beerbohm Tree. They were hoping to create a star turn, to bring down the house with a tirade. As far as they were concerned, my place could go on. Even dear Ellen Terry, with all her charm and amiability, could be as impetuous, overwhelming and absorbing personality, dwarfing everyone on stage. I'm having none of that. I insist on vigour, naturalness, surprise, and above all, perfect audibility and intelligibility.
Shaw is a director.
Shaw was easy to work for. He was very gentle and courtly, but always with the suggestion of a volcano underneath. If he had to say something harsh, he cloaked it so nobody was offended. He could knock the conceit out of you without making you feel humiliated.
He was always patient, but persistent in getting what he wanted, if the actor was capable of it. He was meticulous. Every phrase and pause were considered. He had the power and skill and vitality to make his version seem the only possible one. But he was always open to argument. He had the gift of seeing other people's point of view.
We ran through each scene while he stood right there in front of us. Then he retired to the auditorium and let us run through the scenes uninterrupted while he made detailed notes. Then he left, and Lewis had to implement his notes in the afternoon.
That was no easy task. My job was to help the actors communicate effectively with the audience. Shaw was skilled at helping them get inside their characters, but he wasn't so good at making their performances large enough in the theatre.
Pace is crucial to holding an audience. There should be no time for silences or pauses. The play mustn't stop while you're sitting down or getting up or walking off stage. You must play on the line, not between the lines. You must sit on a word and rise on a word. If you have to make a movement, you must move as you speak, not before or after. And the cues must be picked up as smartly as a ball is fielded in cricket.
Oh, if only he'd listened to his own advice. Yet when he was directing, he wanted every word to be slow enough to get every single idea over. He didn't want the audience to miss a single point. I had my work cut out dealing with all that.
At one rehearsal, he said he would tell us what to do in the morning, but that you were bound to change it all in the afternoon.
Well, that was true. But when I speeded things up, he complained the actors were gabbling. It's a long play, but he refused to cut a single line. He also had a tiresome tendency to overdo the comedy. He loved slapstick. There was something of the eternal schoolboy in him. He was so delighted at the idea of the church canonizing someone whom they had burnt for heresy, witchcraft and sorcery, he overdid the funny business.
Yeah, well, I admit I'm both the tragedian and the clown in me. And sometimes the clown trips me up, just dreadfully.
I was worried that he would shock the audience more than necessary and spoil the shape of the play. I had to restrain him. Fortunately, I was a much better director than him, though rather less patient.
Casson,
Joan in America.
Casson, I don't think much good is coming from these afternoon rehearsals.
On the contrary, I think we need more of them.
You do? Well, have it your way. I don't have the time or energy to argue with you.
I think it will be for the best.
By the way, this morning I received the notices from the New York production. Lenehan is much praised for her Joan, but the critics are not so mad about the play. But that's not stopping the public turning up in droves and many being turned away, so the Guild is transferring it to the larger Empire Theatre.
That's excellent news.
Here, one notice had been written by Pirandello, who says the play is a work of poetry from beginning to end. I agree with him. After all, he's a first-rate playwright. And I've never come across a play so original as 6 characters in search of an author. New York Times sent me his review and invited me to comment. Perhaps I will. Anyway, let's press on with our version.
Sybil in rehearsal.
To me, Joan was a flaming spirit with her warrior nature. I loved playing a woman who had a touch of masculinity. Joan's boyishness appealed to me because I always wished I'd been born a boy. I was more than twice her age, but that didn't matter. It was her passion that counted, not her looks. I walked on air during rehearsals. Shaw took me under his wing. He was as fatherly towards me as I think he could be towards another human being. I worshipped him. I would have done anything for him, crawled on my hands and knees if necessary.
I like an empty head for my ideas, actors who are obedient to my wishes. Sybil was a model in that respect. She'd do anything. Anything I wanted with the cock of an eye. For a whole month, she never let me doubt for a second that as a director she regarded me as far superior to the Holy Trinity.
We worked together like one person. Almost instinctively I knew what he wanted me to say and how I should say it. He gave me such valuable lessons. He took me through the script, indicating the intonation of each line, which I accepted without question.
I had to remind Sybil that in the third scene, Joan doesn't know she's going to be burned in the 6th scene. I also asked her to thicken up considerably in her scenes with the Dauphin, as Thesiger jolly nearly played her off the stage.
Shaw to the rescue.
One morning, when Thesiger had the flu, Sybil was worried, so I stood in for him as the Dauphin.
Cara. Joan. Before I go home.
I stood in for him as the Dauphin.
Before I go home, let's take Paris.
Oh, no. We shall lose everything we've gained. Oh, don't let us have any more fighting. We can make a very good treaty with the Duke of Burgundy.
Treaty?
Well, why not? Now that I'm crowned and anointed. Let us be content with what we have done. Let us make a treaty. Our luck is too good to last. And now is our chance to stop before it turns.
Luck? God has fought for us, and you call it luck. And you would stop while there are still Englishmen on this holy earth of dear France.
That rehearsal put Sybil back on course, and the next day, in the scene when Joan was threatened with prison, she caught exactly her defiant spirit.
Perpetual imprisonment? Light your fire. Do you think I dread it as much as the life of a rat in a hole? It's not the bread and water I fear. I can live on bread. When I ask for more, it is no hardship to drink water if the water is clean. Bread has no sorrow for me, and water no affliction. But to shut down me from the life of the sky and the sight of the fields and the flowers, to chain my feet so I can never again ride with the soldiers nor climb the hills, to make me breathe foul, damp darkness and keep me from everything that brings me back to the love of God, when your wickedness and foolishness tempt me to hate him. All this is worse than the furnace in the Bible that was heated 7 times. I could do without my war horse. I could drag around in a skirt. I could let the banners and the trumpets and the knights and the soldiers pass me and leave me behind as they leave other women. If only I could hear the wind in the trees, the larks in the sunshine, the young lambs crying through the healthy frost, and the blessed, blessed church bells that send my angel voices floating to me on the wind. But without these things I cannot love, and by your wanting to take them away from me, or from any human creature, I know your counsel is of the devil, and that mine is of God.
You have it just as I wanted, Sybil. I don't need to tell you anything more.
Shaw reveals a secret.
Do you know, during these rehearsals, I think often of dear Lillian Bayliss and her work at the Old Vic. She's so like Joan, a woman who carries on a concern for the people by prayer and sure faith. Did you have her in mind?
Certainly not.
Some people say you based her on Elsie Fogarty with her unstoppable drive as a voice coach. She could compel people to do what she wanted.
And often against their will.
You're both wrong. Joan is the archetype of the managing woman. Remember Mary Hankinson? Yeah, a very tough woman with great energy. She ran those Fabian summer schools. She captained the cricket team and policed everyone's morals and drilled us in gymnastics and dancing. There was certainly no panky with panky. One summer she even taught me to waltz backwards.
Oh, she was a truly wonderful suffragette and feminist, and a great campaigner for women's rights.
And Joan certainly inspired that movement. If you read Sylvia Pankhurst, you'll understand a great deal about Joan's psychology. Oh, Mary is the only woman I know who doesn't believe she's the model for Joan, and the only woman who actually is.
Ah, the truth at last.
A question of accent.
Now, it's important that Joan has a believable accent. It's no use making her talk like Dr. Johnson, since she spoke a type of provincial French we don't have a clue about. But no British accent is more appropriate than any other. What you sound like, Sybil, is a strange mixture of Lancashire and West Country.
What Nigel Playfair has called lumpshire.
Exactly. The safe course is to speak English impetuously with a touch of rough country accent here and there in the court scene to distinguish her from the aristocratic court people. But to remember, Joan is always this adventurous, impetuous, wonderful, masterful girl soldier. Even her despair is angry despair.
When we came to the dress rehearsal, Shaw the jester had his moment in the sun.
Oh, look here. All this scenery and all these costumes, they've simply ruined my play. Why can't you act it in plain clothes, as you did in rehearsals? Sybil is much more like Joan in her old jersey and skirt than dressed up like this with her face all painted.
You're right. I do prefer simplicity. I can act much better without any makeup.
The first night.
On the first night, the new theatre was packed. People had been queuing for the gallery since 5 in the morning. The production had sold out 3 weeks ago. Ellen Terry, Mrs. Pat, Forbes Robertson, and many others from the profession were in the audience. So were writers such as Arnold Bennett, A. Milne, and Somerset Maugham.
That day, I went to the early morning service at St Mary's. In the evening, as I waited in the wings for my entrance, for the first time ever, I experienced no stage fright. Usually I am paralytic with nerves, but now I was exalted. I knew God was there, and I didn't care a hoot for anything except getting over what Shaw had written.
The play lasted until nearly midnight. Shaw and Charlotte left just before the end, so it could be said the author was not in the house at the curtain call. The applause was tremendous.
An epilogue.
I feel here we need our own epilogue.
Indeed we do. Now where would we be without one?
Yes, we have to tell the rest of the story.
Reading the reviews.
The next morning, I didn't dare read the notices, but Lewis did.
I'm afraid they're rather mixed about the play, but there's praise for your Joan. The Times said you played her beautifully, and the Telegraph says the play might have been written for Miss Thorndike.
Ha!
James Agate in the Sunday Times says you were inspired and exalted.
Hooray for Jimmy! That's exactly how I felt. Playing Joan has strengthened my faith in God. And I don't feel my years, I feel hers.
Anyway, with Shaw's name, we might just manage a 6-week run, if we're lucky.
Oh, I do hope so.
But we were quite wrong. The next morning, there was a lengthy queue for tickets. The play then ran for 7 months and 244 performances, and broke attendance and box office records at the new theatre.
A family affair.
It became part of our lives, didn't it? It was a real family affair. Our children were frightfully excited by it all. Often they would watch the play from the wings, and soon they knew it all by heart.
Sometimes the older ones would dress up as monks and come on for the trial scene. Even your mother was involved, wasn't she? Playing the organ off stage at the start of the cathedral scene.
And playing it beautifully. Do you remember the day she was given a ride in her car by the Old Vic's manager, Lillian Bayliss? Lillian was a reckless driver and shouted at the other drivers, "Get out of the way, you bounders! I've got Sybil Thorndike's mother in the car and she's playing the organ in St Joan."
Shaw replies to his critics.
I was convinced our production knocked the American one into a cocked hat. It went like mad, and everyone assured me, to my disgust, that it was the best play I'd written. Sybil's acting and Ricketts' sets carried everything before them. St Joan was the new play. A succession of actresses called at my London house, each wanting to play Joan. Countless letters from young women for whom St Joan had set up a standard which uplifted them beyond vulgarity and meanness. One schoolboy told his headmaster he could pray to St Joan, but not to Jesus Christ. Well, that justified for me the theatre as one of the most vital of public institutions. Without such uplift, the playwright may be a pander or a buffoon, an actor, a mere mountebank or common clown. It is this alone which can raise the theatre to the dignity and national value of a church.
But the epilogue came in for a lot of criticism. Hardly anybody was keen on it, including Bronson Albury. They said it was redundant when the trial scene ended so marvellously. But Shaw said, no, that's not the finish. We've got to see what the modern world says.
People said I should cut the epilogue. They claimed it was too wordy or fantastic or too silly and irrelevant. It was an anticlimax, it shatters the historical illusion, and so on. And yet, it's the most earnest part of the play. Without it, it would merely be a sensational story of a girl who was burnt, leaving the spectators plunged in horror and despairing of humanity. I wanted to talk the play over with the audience to bring it into the 20th century, so it was necessary, by hook or by crook, to show the canonised Joan as well as the incinerated one. The true tale has a glorious ending, and any play that did not make this clear would be an insult to her memory. So, the epilogue must stand. If a person's disapproval persists after they have seen the play twice, well, they're clearly mentally deficient.
It astonishes me that anyone would want to lose such a beautiful and important part of the play. It has such pearls of thought in it.
Certain critics explained how the play could be improved in other ways. These knights of the blue pencil pointed out that by cutting all the references to such undramatic and tedious matters as the church, the feudal system, the Inquisition, the theory of heresy and so forth, the play could be considerably shortened. Yeah, having saved an hour and a half by disemboweling the play, they would waste 2 hours building elaborate scenery, having real water for the River Loire and a real bridge across it, and staging an obviously sham fight for possession of it with the victorious French led by Joan on a real horse. Joan would be burnt on stage on the principle that it does not matter in the least why a woman is burnt, and people can pay to see it. Pay to see it done. But the intervals between the acts should seem eternal to the great profit of the refreshment bars. And the weary and demoralised audience would miss their last train home and curse me for writing such an intolerably long, dreary and meaningless play.
Matters of religion.
Many clergymen were deeply offended by St Joan. I had to reply to many biting arguments and the bitter letters sent to me. But Shaw took the bull by the horns. For one performance, he arranged for the Carmelite nuns of St Teresa to have a lot of seats. It was wonderful to hear them rocking with laughter at the comic elements.
I think his great ability was to show both sides of the argument. This led people to wonder if he was converting to Catholicism.
I had to tell them there's no room for 2 popes in the Catholic Church.
Shaw often talked to me about religion, or nothing too abstruse or analytical. He knew I was not clever enough for that. But he had read a lot about religion and was constantly thinking about it. He seemed to know the Bible by heart and was always quoting from it. He had a deep understanding of Catholicism. I suppose it was the Irish in him that made him get the Catholic view so marvellously, with his own free thinking on top of that.
Shortly after the opening, we bumped into him in Leicester Square.
We're suddenly proving a great success. What shall we do next?
How about a play about Queen Elizabeth and Richard III?
Yes, you and Thesiger can play both parts in turn.
That would be enormous fun.
The Nobel Prize.
Before St Joan, many people used to describe me as a Mephistopheles, but now I was the very odour of sanctity. I myself was canonised when they awarded me the Nobel Prize for Literature for 1925. I wrote nothing that year, which is probably why they gave it to me. The prize was a calamity. Thousands of people wrote to me for loans, mostly for the entire prize money, and another million wrote to say that as I was rich, I could afford to adopt their children, or pay off their mortgages on their homes, or publish a priceless book explaining the mystery of the universe. It says a good deal for female virtue that only 2 women proposed. I should take them on as my mistresses.
The aftermath.
At one point, there was an attempt to film St Joan. Up to now, Shaw had refused all offers to screen his plays, but he did consider allowing one scene of St Joan to be shot.
He and Lewis and I made a 5-minute phone film using synchronised film and sound, during which we discussed questions of language.
Shaw then allowed the cathedral scene to be filmed as an experiment, saying more scenes could be shot if it were successful. We filmed it in a tiny studio under a railway arch in Clapham, but Shaw still wasn't sure about the idea.
But I was. I absolutely refused to have anything more to do with it. I was simply dreadful. Anyway, I don't believe stage plays can be adequately represented on the screen. I think that cheats the audience.
So that was the end of that experiment.
One day a teacher asked my permission to reproduce a scene in a school book. I turned him down ruthlessly. I told him I would lay an eternal curse on whosoever should make school books of my works, and make me as hated by children as Shakespeare is.
When the play was printed, Shaw presented me with a copy. In it, he had inscribed a playful dedication to St Sybil Thorndike from St Bernard Shaw. St Joan was the greatest thing that ever happened to me in the theatre. I went on playing the part for many years. I felt Shaw's great plays had all the things the world needed to hear. It said so many things that I felt deeply about. Had Joan lived today, I would have followed her without question. She was a free thinker. Then we burnt her. Of course, we're more civilised now. Or are we?